maybe probably in a problem, because if you know what you are going to do with the money that you get, then it's, for me, it is not an innovation, because innovation for me is exploring something that you have behind a huge risk.
I tend to agree. I mean, if somebody takes your risk, then there is no risk, essentially. And the problem of Europe is that the appetite for risk is very low. And unless you change that, it'll never be innovative. The only way, if you foster a mechanism in which you have many people coming in and fast, and die fast, in the sense that good ideas are sometimes 1 cent a dozen. Doing a product out of this good idea, which is disruptive, is much more difficult. And then you want just to bring in other partners. It's clear that it cannot be done by the Commission and the research infrastructure itself. If private investors are not coming in, if venture capitalists, if people who have this thing of investing into that are not coming into this environment, you have just to make really an ecosystem. What is missing in Europe is this ecosystem. And unless we start working in this direction, I mean, we will have a lot of good examples, but never an environment.
Would somebody want to add something on that comment? Are there any other questions?
Might be another. Possibly the question might be then: is there another way to measure research performance than just patents and publications?
Well, we are at the moment working on a data citation index instead of only a literature or publication citation index. That's, I think, the next step when we want to have open science. But I agree, if we could individually also define as an innovation index, this would be great. But I think we are far away from this. Yeah, but we already heard that the risk culture in Europe is not so high. So this is.
I'm sorry. I think there's a very strong European quality in terms of technical proposals. The question is leveraging and brokering that knowledge and getting traction. And I think that if we were able to come up with a performance metric that went beyond a patent or a publication or a citation, we might be able to match performance and risk.
Clusters and spin-offs. So we are part of a cluster called MBRIC, which is connected to the use of biological resources for development of marine biotechnology, and involves 5 infrastructures at least, 5 infrastructures, S3 infrastructures. Last week we had a midterm review and we were told that there is no plan to fund any more clusters other than open data. It seems to me, from at least what we've heard today and from our own experience, that clustering of infrastructures is a very positive step which should be nurtured. But it seems as if we have a one-off funding. So I don't know, maybe not the panel, but maybe the European Commission could tell us a little bit more about the plans for the future. Because this reminds me of, networks of excellence and other ideas that died very early.
I don't know if Philip.
Yeah. Okay. What we propose in the next program, work program 1820, as regard clusters, is indeed to have an action, which we call clusters, targeting more precisely the connectivity of the S3 projects to the European Open Science Cloud. So we will look at the clusters in that context. Bearing in mind that clusters in the past, and first of all, incidentally, it was not a one-off because there were clusters in FP7 as well. But the cluster call that we had at the beginning of Horizon 2020 was very much focused on management of data and how to address in this configuration of clusters, and that means grouping S3 projects and not necessarily only S3 projects working in one domain around the issue of the management of the data. And what we would like to do is to move on from what these projects had done or are presently doing to the next challenge that we have now, which is basically the connectivity of these S3 projects and the pan-European research infrastructures to the European Open Science Cloud.
One last question. The last one.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Pablo Roman. I work in Elixir Infrastructure for Bioinformatics. Regarding about the risk for innovation, I think, and I would like to know the opinion of the panel, I think when you base your business model on open data and open resources, I think the risk is slightly mitigated because actually the risk sits with the funders and with the infrastructures. We know several examples of companies making services and building services on top of open data, and they are very innovative, but I think the risk is slightly less in those cases. So I think we could foster those business models, and that's a way to kind of decrease a little bit the risk. I don't know if you have some opinions in this particular issue. Thanks.
I would propose one last comment based on from all of you.
Yeah, I'd just like to say something about the cluster thing. Simply that I'd like to, just as a social scientist, I'd like to reinforce the comment that came from the questioner, because what we're doing, I'm not so sure it's necessarily big social science. What it is it's a collection of lots and lots of small and medium scale social science. So ESS is a cross-national survey, but it's a devolved set of national initiatives. So it's really important that there's a sort of critical mass at some point in social science, and one of the things that CERES has done is you bring together operations which share a lot of common problems but would otherwise have no formal mechanism for meeting and discussing best practice. It sounds crazy that wouldn't exist, but it just doesn't happen in academic life outside the normal channels. And so it's really, really important to avoid reinventing the wheel and being efficient with public money, that you build critical mass, particularly in social science, because it's such a bitty, dispersed kind of endeavor in terms of data collection.
I have two final remarks, one also about the clusters. I agree that focusing only on the data is, from my point of view, as a cluster coordinator, not enough. For example, we have a big theme in ENVI Plus on technological developments, and the offspring of this theme is this industry cooperation meeting. And I think this is quite important to have something like this. The other remark to the open data and the risks, we are putting our data, or we are offering our data under the Creative Commons BY license. So it is open also for commercial use. So from our side, the risk for a company using our data for commercial services is reduced to zero. We will never come later and ask for payment of the data. This is coming with our license. That's what we can do to reduce the risk. But of course, we cannot take the risk of a company using our data.
Just one more point on the open data. Something occurred to me is that just because you make data freely available and completely open, the job of maintenance doesn't stop and the costs don't stop. So in the cluster projects, for instance, when you've got people developing, I don't know, survey management programs that could be shared, or translation software, or questionnaire design, documentation, or data banks, these things are all sort of free and open source, but the trouble is they have to be maintained, and just because data is open, unless it's fully documented and curated, and there is user documentation, it's not going to be that easy to use. And so that's just the point about open data, the idea that we said, well, we make everything open and that's job done. I think there are still risks, and the risks are about the costs of its ongoing maintenance and its preservation.
And with this message to the officers of the European Commission as well, I would like to thank you very much for your participation, and we can move to the next session.
Okay, we're just going to change the names and the waters on the table. The next session is going to be mostly a roundtable session. We are going to have a short presentation from one of the speakers. And because we're a bit late with the schedule, and our technical support will have to leave at the time we finish this in the agenda, so we are going to have to shorten a little bit. Maybe the final presentation can be a little bit shortened as well, we'll see. So I'd like to invite to the table the speakers of the last session. It's going to be Gabriel von Voigt, Ed Parsons, Carlos Oliveira, Philippe Froissart, and Giorgio Rossi, please. And it was my failing with the organization. I just got 5 chairs here, so I'm going to be standing in the corner. It's going to be my punishment for this. Okay, so I would like to start by inviting Professor von Voigt to give a small presentation to support her comments on this symposium. So Professor von Voigt is a professor at the Leibniz University in Hanover, and it's also the recently minted chair of the EIRG, and she's going to talk a little bit about infrastructures and the role the EIRG have in creating the framework for them to work nicely and to provide the nice framework for innovation in Europe as well.
Okay, I have to speed up, huh? So shall I speak? No, I speak in a normal tone and in a normal pace, huh? Okay, anyway, thank you for the introduction. Yes, I speak on behalf of EIRG. There on the bottom on the right-hand side, you see the logo from EIRG, so if you want to have a look at our website, please do so. EIRG is mainly a consultancy board, and it's a group of experts from all the European countries. So we have basically from each country, we have 1 or 2 delegates. They are normally nominated by their ministry, and we do work on everything around e-infrastructures. So, and the first thing we did was started in 2012. We developed the so-called commons of e-infrastructure. And why do I mention it? Yeah, we kept on going with it, and we will pick it up in a minute again. The e-infrastructures are basically below the research infrastructures, and what we think is important. I mean, you all know, how many passwords do you have? Huh? Just give me a rough number. Huh? I'm always happy if one, good. That's the one here. He must be one of the developers of this paper. Anyway, what is good to have a common access, of course, with one password you immediately have the security people on board who say if this one password is cracked, yeah, the hacker basically has access to all of your services. Of course, you're not interested in that, especially if it's your banking service. Anyway, we developed the e-infrastructure commons, and here you see the main points of the infrastructure commons, and what did it lead to? Basically, to this picture. Let me check. Yeah. Here are our research infrastructures. We heard a lot about these research infrastructures today. And underneath, we have the e-infrastructure commons. Here they are. And you know the other buzzwords we have nowadays, which are good, is the European Open Science Cloud. And we heard about that today as well. And we heard about data. Data we heard a lot just in the last one. And I think actually data is very, very important. I mean, we all know it, how much you can do with data. Just think about it. You know why Zalando, you know Zalando? Oh, all females know Zalando, huh? Yeah? Okay. You know that Zalando doesn't make his money from selling the shoes. You know that? Yeah? Okay, what's Zalando's business model? They make it on the data. What data? Not just the pure data, but they evaluate your data. So when you buy your shoes, they know, oh, female person around the age of 40 like to buy this type of shoes. So we give this to the producer of the shoes, like from Nike or Adidas. Like I'm a tennis player, sort of class. Yeah, not that good. So they know exactly this type of player likes to wear this type of shoes. So that's important for them to develop the next shoes in the next generation. And that's what they make the money of. Yeah? But think about it. Whenever you buy something, you provide your data, and whoever works with them, yeah, can do something with it. Anyway, that's the one we are interested in, and I think it's a good concept, and I think, Philip, you will pick it up eventually with your talk later on as well, a little bit on about the European Open Science Cloud, or you already mentioned it in any way. It is a good concept. You don't have to pick it up, sorry. Okay, where do we have an example? I'm a professor, just a normal professor of computer science, and whenever I'm in a university, I just log into EduRoam. EduRoam is a development by Géant, and basically it works mainly to nearly all European universities. So whenever you log in, you don't have to hand in your password, because basically the authentication is done by your university. And that's a good concept. There was someone clever. And I like these clever examples, like EduRoam. EduGain is the same for students and researchers. And you see one more example where they ensure the delivery of critical data. It's a work between Géant and EUMETSAT. You can look it up in the net. So I think these are good examples when research basically is done and from Géant is used in a very good productive way. So we can think about that. And yeah. So what do we do with EIG? Basically, we are not producing anything like someone did here, offering services. But what we do produce are basically papers. Yeah. So it is. But some of them have good ideas. You just mentioned. May I speak to this lady again who just had the problems with the microphone? You just mentioned about performance and indexing it. We just presented a paper on KPIs for e-infrastructures. I actually like your idea about the performance, and maybe we can speak later. Maybe it should be included somehow. I don't know how exactly, but I think it might be something for KPIs as well. KPIs for me are important, not for just measuring it like the key performance indicators like you do, but for going further. Like it is with good controlling. If you have a good controller in your business, he wouldn't go and say, point at you, do finger pointing and say, you do this and that's wrong and it's too expensive. He would go to you and say, here, you can basically raise the level of your game in this respect. And that's, I think it's a good thing. So with this here, I will stop with my presentation. I have some more slides, but I was told I have only 5 minutes. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you. And we have now on the table 5 speakers. And the idea was to now give the opportunity for each of these panelists to go back to what has been discussed so far and try to come up with ways that we can foster innovation in research infrastructures. So we have some distinguished guests here, and I would maybe start by inviting each of them to make a few comments on what has happened so far. And I'm particularly interested in hearing from the 2 guests from the far end of the table. So first we have Carlos Oliveira. He is a member of the high-level expert group on the European Innovation Council, and he has served in the Portuguese government as a Secretary of State for Innovation, Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Competitiveness. And he's now heading an organization up in the north of Portugal, which has the objective of stimulating entrepreneurship and also the creation of startups and all that. So I think we've been listening mostly from the academic part. So I think we have 2 guests now that can give us a few insights from the other side, from the entrepreneurs and from the major companies that we're going to go to afterwards. So please, Mr. Carlos Oliveira.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to be invited. It was a great session. It started with a great presentation this morning that set the framework on the discussion. And as you were mentioning, I'm from the other side, the side of industry, the side of value creation. You were mentioning that, but I think that this is also part of the problem, is that I think that we are all in the same side. And I've heard a lot of things this morning here, and as you mentioned, I'm now part of this high-level group, which the goal is to create an European Innovation Council at the European level, which one of the most important, I would say, ideas is coming because there is an ERC that worked so well in the science part that the Commissioner and the Commission want to find a way on how we can foster and make Europe relevant in this next wave of innovation. And the assumptions are that from an industry perspective, we haven't been able in Europe to create the large or the relevant companies that create jobs, that create the competitiveness that we need to keep our European living. And I think that at the end of the day, why do we talk about this importance of creating economic value or creating value from research is at the end of the day because we want to live much better in the future. And if we use our brains and what has been researched to get that value, we'll be living much better in the future. And there are a lot of concerns in Europe about that. We've been seeing that irrespectively of a lot of research being successful being done in Europe, then it's companies from other regions that are really getting the money out of these things. Even recently I was, and this was something that Commissioner Moedas was mentioning, NASA just made that great announcement on that finding of the new similar planispheres. I don't know exactly the scientific term. And what he's saying is that, but great part of this research was done by European scientists, and by the way, funded probably by many of the programs from Horizon 2020 or even previous programs. And Europe is not capturing this value to create to create the economic or this impactful value. So when I was in government here in Portugal, I worked very closely with the Secretary of State for Science, because I believe that we have a lot of potential in the science that has been done and that is already there to create economic value. But I also disagree with the fundamental term that exists, which is transfer of technology. I don't believe in transfer of technology, which, by the way, has been there for years and years, because I don't believe that someone closed in research will be able to do technology or whatever that is then transferred to industry. I really believe that this is all about communication and about dialogue. Industry and research infrastructures need to start talking early on in the project, and some of the speakers early on today have mentioned that this is an important part. We really need to have these conversations early. I'm not saying for fundamental, I agree that there are things that you don't need industry for anything, but for more applied science and technology, there certainly is an advantage. And for me, and I'm an entrepreneur, I founded my first company after getting out of university, or I was still in my last year of my graduation in computer science. My company was some years later acquired by Microsoft, and I was at university for a while. But I think that the problem, one of the important problems is to put people in companies that know how to talk with researchers and people in the infrastructures that know how to talk with the industry, and to understand what is the common problems and the common things to be sorted out. Early in the morning there was a presentation that mentioned the importance of the use case for the research. And one of the things that I find often in my thing is that great technologies are being presented with a use case that doesn't serve a purpose from an industry perspective. And if industry understands a bit and has the time to speak with researchers, they will drill down and get to the point where, oh, maybe this technology is not great to solve that use case, which is great to a paper or to a PhD, but probably not for industry. But if we work together and we restate the problem, we'll use that technology to serve something that will make some societal change, or that will create jobs, or that, and by the way, this part of creating jobs, going back to the previous panel, this might be creating jobs for researchers that will not have place in the researchers entities in their, or infrastructures in their countries. And I think this is an important part. So this creation of a dialogue between industry and the research infrastructures and academia is crucial. And I think that this is, I can say, is missing, because in some places it's working, and it's working very well. But from a common perspective in Europe, and if I look here at Portugal, is certainly one of the big challenges. If we can put people to discuss early on what they have to do, certainly there will be lots of successful challenges. Then the other point, and I don't want to spend too much time in this first introduction that was talked here previously, was about entrepreneurship. I usually say one thing. I don't want, and I'm running an incubator accelerator, I don't want a great scientist to become a poor entrepreneur. So there are many solutions for scientists and people that are doing research to collaborate with startups without the burden to be the managers and doing things that don't like. And sometimes we just think that if there is research that is being done, the scientist immediately needs to be the CEO or needs to take a part. That's probably the wrong answer to the problem. We really need scientists to do great science, to do things that maybe entrepreneurs pick, and then they can execute and create products that really innovate and bring solutions. And for me, this is exactly the thing. An entrepreneur for me is a very basic thing. It's someone that is able to execute on a vision. He might not have the idea, he might not be the owner of the IP, and I think this is an important thing. The third and last thing for my first intervention is all about IP. I've been seeing a lot of research infrastructures requiring a lot of IP restrictions for potential entrepreneurial opportunities. And one thing is that no private investor will put money in a startup if there isn't clarity about how the IP is managed and how the IP can be an asset in the future of the company for a potential trade sale or for an exit or for the exploitation of the product in the markets. And so I had an idea, and I think that the tract is a nice idea. It looks very interesting. I'm not sure if having open information about things that you want the private sector to fund will work out very well. So maybe there needs to be some level of open information. Certainly there are, because there's an important thing that in Europe and in the US they do it much better than we, is the creation of products. One thing is creating products, and there are services and delivering services. So there's many services delivering on top of open source and open technologies. At the end of the day, it's not a product, it's a service that is provided. If we really want to make products which have IP, which are protected, which can be sold in several markets, then the IP is very important. And I think that there should be, and I think that the Commission should help with the framework which should be like a best practice, and there are many institutions in Europe that already apply these best practices. This best practice so that infrastructures all across Europe are not trying to reinvent the wheel on how to license IP each time they start looking at it. Last point on IP, and this is important because I participated in a lot of the competitiveness councils before, the Horizon 2020, and one of my things was related to FP7 was whatever comes next needs to go near to the industry. We need to cover that gap because many of the things that were done in FPs prior to this to 8, they stayed somewhere in a limbo between science and industry, and because there was never the instrument in funding to bring it to market, or the large companies had it. But we mostly have small and medium enterprises in Europe, and we need to sort out the problem. So, and I think that Horizon 2020 did a great step into bringing these opportunities of transforming this research into potential innovative products that will help the economy. But my point was more on the side of the KPIs of how we measure success. European 2020 was saying European countries need to spend 3% of their GDP in research, part public, other part private. They also said, or it also states, we should increase the number of filed patents in a certain number. I do personally think that this is nice input indicators. They look at the input. They don't look at the output. So here in Portugal, we were in a crisis, and I was in government, and I was saying, sorry, if we can't spend 3%, which we can't as a country until 2020, whatever we can spend, we need to spend it with the best opportunity to create value. So if we just can spend 1.6 or 2%, let's do it in the best way, and let's look at the results and not at the input. And the very same in patents. I don't know in the countries that you represent, but many institutions here in Portugal spend money filing patents because the input was how many patents you file and not the kind of patents that you are filing that have a potential to have an economic impact. And what is happening now is that many of those patents are now liabilities, and they are not assets. So they are being dismissed because institutions now realize they will never make money out of it, so why should I keep spending money? So the important part of looking at patents, and before it was said, there are trade secrets, there are many ways to protect your IP. I think that the patents are great if you feel that there is a potential for future trade on that patent. And you can ask me, and you know how to do that? No. So it needs a lot of ideation and a lot of discussion. But I think that my point is more, you shouldn't think immediately, let's file a patent just because I've got something here. The patent should be filed after there is some discussion, maybe with some industry, with people that you are confident and that you know that will not use the information for their own sake, but at least trying to use this expertise. And I'll stop here with this. But my point is that I really believe that the potential for economic growth in Europe is on the science and on the brains that we have. So if we really can solve this part of the equation, how to really make industry and research centers to work collectively, I think that will have a bright future.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think you've invited some comments from the audience, but I'll just go through the other guests first. So talking of SMEs, Ed Parson does not work at one, right? So you're the geo strategist, right, at Google. And I'm really curious about how a company like Google looks at all of this, because I would say that just looking at it without thinking about the formalities of European lingo, you probably have more than one research infrastructure within Google. Like if you think about Google Trends, or if you think about Google Cloud, or Google Scholar even, those could be considered like research infrastructures in themselves, right? On the other hand, we've heard comments about you can't monetize something you give away for free. We heard that from the social survey. And Google started by basically doing that, right? Your idea is just to provide free services, and then you have to find ways to monetize somewhere else. And how does a large company like Google that has their own research, that might come up with a quantum computer before Europe even starts to fund the quantum technologies flagship, how do you look at all of this, and what do you think Europe could be doing different? And how would Europe be doing well to attract companies like Google into the system?
Okay, so there's a lot there to deal with. So, I mean, I guess I'm, like Carlos here, representing industry. And I think industry from perhaps a consumer of research infrastructures rather than a supplier or a partner. And actually, research infrastructures is a term that's pretty much alien to industry. You know, we don't talk in terms of, you know, research infrastructures internally. You know, all have research projects, all have products, but it's a different way of looking at the problem. And if I step back, you know, my comments here both come from my time at Google. I've been at Google 10 years now, but previous to that, I was in the UK government. I was in the National Mapping Agency in the UK Ordnance Survey, and I ran the innovation unit there. And I think it's important to focus on actually what do we mean by innovation, really. And innovation is actually about doing what you probably already do, but doing it differently, and hopefully doing it better. And it might not be every time that you innovate that you end up doing something better. A lot of innovation is about failure. It's about trying out new things, working out that they don't actually meet the needs, and trying a different approach. And innovation really does rely on you understanding what you are trying to do. And I think Carlos made a very good point in that it's often hard to sort of parachute into an industry with a technology, with some fundamental science, and solve a problem if you don't actually understand what the industry is trying to do. And that was an issue I had even just working at Ordnance Survey. I was running the innovation team, and they were the 60th brightest people that we had in the organization. We came up with loads of fantastic innovations, but actually very few of them stuck in the rest of the business because they were perceived to have been invented somewhere else. And I think a lot about getting innovation to be successful is actually a cultural problem. At Google, we try to say to everyone that it's your responsibility to innovate in whatever you do. If you're the receptionist in the office, how could you make what you do better? What things would you change to innovate in what you do? All the way up to senior researchers working on much more complex issues around computer vision or artificial intelligence. They themselves are the innovators. They are the researchers. There are other teams doing research, but the expectation is that the innovation comes internally. It's very hard to develop that from outside the organization. Now, when we do big research projects, we call them moonshots. They are huge, what we perceive, leaps into the future of capability. An example of that might be self-driving cars. So, well, wouldn't it be fantastic if to reduce the number of people killed on their roads and making roads more efficient, we had autonomous vehicles. That's the moonshot. That's what we want to be able to achieve. And that then fires off all sorts of different innovations and different research across the business in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of different sensing technologies, all of which in themselves will have byproducts that appear in other parts of what Google does. So we spend a lot of time developing algorithms that could recognize features from a video of the world that you see if you're driving in a vehicle, but those same algorithms are used in Google Maps to automatically identify buildings. So it's the same technology, but being deployed in different parts of the business. And I guess to answer your question, that's the equivalent of our research infrastructure. We'll have a big project that we work on, different teams across the business try to work on it, and they very publicly explain what they do. We have an intranet that is pretty much open. You can go and look at other projects, what they're doing, what their key performance indicators are and understand the process and go and ask, well, could I use this piece of code in my particular project? So there's that internal openness. Some other points I was going to make. The reason I said that, I see Google as a consumer of perhaps research infrastructures elsewhere rather than being a partner is one based on just the difference in temporal perspective, in the way that time works. I often talk about Google product managers and scientists having the attention span of a goldfish. We think about things very short term. If something hasn't happened that's interesting or relevant within 6 months, we're off working on another project. We've changed our minds, we've gone off and we've done something else. That doesn't work with building large research partnerships that take 2 or 3 years of negotiations to build and agree IP rights over. We just can't conceptualize working at those sorts of time frames. So it's very hard for us then to work in external partnerships because of that. Not because there's no willingness there, but because of that difficulty in sort of almost the dimensionality of time there. And my final point, recognizing that it is a little bit of a rush towards the end of the afternoon, is that I believe that the future value generators, the future innovators that hopefully will come from Europe, will do so because they see innovation as something that is meeting the needs of truly global markets. The products and services that we create today don't recognize the national boundaries, even the boundaries of Europe. And I think sometimes it could be difficult or providing ourselves with barriers that are not helpful to say, oh, this is a European research infrastructure, or we're focusing on the European market. The reality is everything we do today is global in its nature. And we have to build solutions that meet the needs and encompass the global research community moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So with that, I'd like to maybe move to Professor Giorgio Rossi, who is a professor at the University of Milan. He's also, incidentally, the coordinator of NFFA Europe, which was presented here in the morning. But here today, he's sitting on this table in his capacity as the chair of the ESFRI. So that's a tremendous amount of work, I believe. So, and on this respect of the research infrastructures and innovation, you have multiple words to say, I believe, from the working groups on innovation, on long-term sustainability that are ongoing, the latter one, and the update of the roadmap that is going to happen soon. So I think several people here would really like to hear some words about the ESFRI views on the contribution of innovation to the roadmap.
Thank you. So listening to the discussion of this interesting day, I feel I can try to summarize some ideas. Europe has a fairly decent set of research infrastructure. They're multidisciplinary and they talk to each other across disciplines. They're starting to talk effectively to each other. So Europe has developed a good methodology to select the infrastructures and to select new infrastructures, and has, let's say, even a decent way, after all, to support them, to finance them, to make them. The ESFRI roadmap, but of course the national roadmaps as well, get implemented. So this is a very strong background for innovation, but it is not innovation by itself, at least not on the broad scale that we tend to imagine when we mention innovation. So all of the research infrastructure effort is a backbone, is a fundamental for supplying knowledge, and knowledge is at the basis of any sort of innovation, but it's just the basis for it. Another word that we use a lot is sustainability, and we have applied it a lot also to the analysis of the research infrastructures. And this again has a local meaning and a general meaning. The local meaning means that we have to carefully evaluate, scrutinize, follow, monitor, assess each research infrastructure to discover how it can best perform, results versus resources. But in the general sense, sustainability is a must. I mean, if we set up a research infrastructure system because we need the knowledge to support any development of the society and economy, it has to be sustainable. So it has to be built in the decision of making them. So we develop clusters, we do bridges, we do industrial liaison organizations and offices, and all of this is important. It is on the side of research infrastructure. Data is a point that I want to touch briefly later. But this does not represent in itself innovation, or at least let me try to make a ranking. There is certainly some direct or spontaneous innovation that is carried along with the research infrastructure. It has been mentioned, the procurement, the participation of industry and services, not only industry, in the construction, and so there is a feedback of new knowledge going into the industry. But these tend to be local. So it improves and it strengthens and it can give world leadership of some very highly specialized thing, industry or activities. Very good. But when we speak of the very large scale return of knowledge, we don't think at some highly specialized but overall marginal economically activities. Then there is, of course, the indirect. The indirect impact, that's general, that is distributed on a long time scale, that is disruptive knowledge that may create much later and under circumstances that cannot be planned, major change in the production paradigm or new products or new ways of behaving. So this is again true. It has to do with generating knowledge, but it cannot be organized. But then there is a third chapter, which is the one that we tend to mix in, and that is a strategic innovation. And the strategic innovation is the so-called high risk, and it can only, because it has only in history, be supported by the so-called patient capitals, that is public funding. Long-term public funding to develop technologies, to develop know-how that then can be differently integrated and packaged by industry also for scopes on the market that were not the strategic ones. And this is, you know, the long story of the GPS, the internet, all the fundamental items that make one of the things that are on our laps or in our pockets apparently a big piece of innovation. It is a big piece of innovation because it determines different way of behaving. It's integration of knowledge that came from long-term public funding, either military or civil. And Europe is very weak on that ground. So we cannot put on the responsibility of the research system, not only the research infrastructure, but the research system, the fact of generating the broad innovation that has a huge societal and huge economic impact if there is not a strategic, call it industrial policy or just policy of economic development, giving some directions in which it is known that long-term funding, public funding will be there, and then the private comes in. If we launch projects that are too closely connected with the concept of research project, so they last 4 years, they may be renewed, but we're not sure. Hardly they can be renewed a third time, because otherwise we jeopardize some new ideas coming along. This is not the substrate for innovation on the long term. So if we miss that, I think we will stick with the direct and indirect innovation, which are important, but don't seem to answer the big quest of how our investment in research translates into innovation. And of course, there are many examples. We don't have the time. The development of photovoltaics, of wind energy, and etc., that went differently in different countries and different continents because of the different continuity in public support of those fields, so what we call strategic, and as a consequence of that, of the big involvement. You know, the venture capital does not create innovation. The venture capital rides on the innovation wake when there is an innovation wake. The venture capital buys and sells. It does not get into something that has no perspective, clear, sure perspective of revenue. It's not a fault, it's the way it works. It's only long-term, inevitably public capital that do the new knowledge on which we build new initiatives from the private and from the services as well. So I think Europe has to make its mind and decide something in the green economy, energy storage, the food, on computing elements, I don't know. But if it does that, it has to be very long term, and then it will produce innovation, draining from all the knowledge coming also from research infrastructure, which is a good reservoir of knowledge. The last point is on data. Data is a strategic thing, I believe, and here research infrastructures are important, I believe, because not just because they produce large amounts of data, not just because they are already in the culture of making the data suitably stored and preserved and curated and retrievable and so on and so forth, but because it has built in all the qualities, if it is given the proper responsibility, to certify the goodness of the data. Going to the big data economy means that there will be a lot of junk around. Many data will be not good for different reasons. We already see on the internet what we can find on very sensible items like health or nutrition, and there is a lot of good but plenty of junk. And I think the research infrastructures should develop to the point of being acknowledged for any application and for industrial application, for service application, as certified producers of good data, so that the data that are labeled somehow coming from a research infrastructure with responsible users who have produced them should be an asset on which to build part of this data economy, which I think is inevitable and it's good and has a lot of potential of giving the return we are expecting from research infrastructures. Okay, I'll stop here.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So I'd like to now give the floor to Philippe Froissart. You've heard from him. We started from one end, and it seems like it's strategic because in the end, all the roads lead to the person who's perceived like the one keeping the bags of money, and so there's so it's a very tricky position to be at. I understand that you get inputs from many places, including S3, EIRG, all the stakeholders here. And in the end, you have to try to come up with the best possible way to support these topics and other with the work program. So from what you've seen here today and what is being prepared for the next work program, what do you think do you think what's being done is a good example for what should be done in the future, and what's your insight into that?
You want me to answer that? Sorry?
We haven't seen you.
No. I should introduce myself. Well, I was going to say that what we are discussing and what I should be discussing is not only the contribution of the framework program, for instance, to this issue of innovation, because what, for instance, Octavie presented this morning goes well beyond the framework program and mentioned, for instance, this consultation on long-term sustainability and the fact that innovation was identified as one of the conditions for sustainability of research infrastructures that we know of will not be addressed only and exclusively by the framework program. That will require investment from and involvement of all actors in that game, mainly member states, the funding agencies, the research performing organizations, the managers and the operators of the research infrastructures. Everyone has a role to play in that. And that goes to the, when you see the kind of recommendation that could come out of this consultation, and you can see clearly that everyone has a role to play. But we have our part to play as well. And I have to say I was very pleased today to listen to the various presentations that were made by the people that were presenting their projects and their experience, because it was clear that there are many good examples that can be shared to a larger community of people of what has been done in these projects. Traditionally, we look at innovation with research infrastructures in a limited group of infrastructures, the big infrastructures like you have the material analytical facilities of the physics infrastructures. Why? Because they cost a lot of money, they lead to development of high-tech components, and you see very easily the relationship between possible potential suppliers and these infrastructures. But what we've seen today was actually there were many initiatives that were done by research infrastructures that are in other fields, like you have in environment, like you have in biomedical science, like you have in social science and humanities. And that is something that certainly is very interesting to see. What I've seen as well is that the recommendations that were highlighted this morning by Octavie, both from the S3 working group on innovation as well as on the communication on long-term sustainability of research infrastructures, were to a large extent already taken up by these actors, by the research infrastructures that have already applied these principles and these recommendations in their daily activities. And really, I think we have here a wealth of good examples that can be shared to a large communities, because I don't know how many projects are represented in this room today, but at the end of Horizon 2020 we will have about 100 integrating activities, for instance, that we will have supported. And I think it would be very, very valuable if all these projects could be aware of what you have done yourself in your own project, with your own research infrastructures, to facilitate, for instance, the interaction with the industry, the access to industry, what you have done concretely to move the goalpost and develop the innovation potential of our infrastructures. I think it was good to hear on several occasions, and including on this table by the first speaker, the role of the human factor, and the role of humans in this relationship that we have between infrastructures, research infrastructures, the research communities and the industry. There were several remarks and comments that were made regarding the possible mobility between the different, I was going to say, worlds and the scheme that could be put into place precisely to facilitate the mobility and the exchange of experience between infrastructures, the research world and the industry. And that's something that we tend to forget, because we usually see, when we talk about human resources, the world of research infrastructures, and we focus ourselves on the exchange scheme, for instance, for the managers of research infrastructures, or the training of users. I think what was also interesting was that I think it was mentioned by Laser Lab that it's not one or the other, in a sense that it's not science, excellent science, or innovation, or it can be both, and you can indeed do excellent science and as well facilitate and develop the innovation capacity of the infrastructures. And I'd like to come back on one of the statements that was made also by Giorgio at the end of his intervention, and that was also made by Giselmina this morning, is the fact that when it comes to innovation and interaction and relationship with industry, it's something that has to be perceived in a time frame which goes well beyond the type of grants that we can provide. And it's a long-term strategy. And that's something we tend to forget. And that means that this policy is something that has to be built along a long time frame. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we'll open the floor for questions. We already have one there.
Well, thank you very much for your presentations. And I'd like to address myself this common question to the two representing the private sector. In research, it's relatively easy to invite third country participants, because in the end, it's knowledge and so forth. But and the cooperation is quite straightforward. But when you think about public intervention with public money, and then cooperating with third country, you mentioned that with innovation there are no borders, but I'm sorry, we as representing taxpayers, we need to set some borders, because innovation is a critical field in which you cannot, as it were, putting money for the competitors. And this is why, in a way that's rather artificial and difficult to do, but we say for Europeans, yes, for non-Europeans, no. I understand that it may be a little bit nonsense, in the sense that the market doesn't have borders, but it would be difficult to explain to the taxpayers that we are, in fact, funding potential competitors to the Europeans, as it were. So I'd like to have comments from the two of you, because this is a real problem we have. It's not something that, it's something that we're really discussing when we are thinking of what to do in FP9.
No, and I completely take your point, but you are creating infrastructures, you're creating a foundation upon which other activities, be it more research or hopefully commercial activity, can take place. If you look at the great research infrastructures that have existed in the past, the creation of NASA to go to the moon, or the creation of the internet, they were activities that were funded largely by the United States taxpayer, but we've all benefited. The whole world has benefited from those. And at the time, I suppose there wasn't the explicit focus on we're doing this just for the US. We were doing it to solve a particular problem. And I think that's where the focus needs to be. We are creating infrastructures for research to solve particular problems, to meet the requirements of particular societal or economic needs, of which there will be benefit globally, but clearly, you know, what we are focusing on is what the benefit is going to be for European citizens. But I think it is very, you know, very short-sighted to think that the solutions to these problems are going to be something that we can draw a board around and say this is something that only occurs in a particular geography.
Well, I think that each time a PhD paid by any taxpayer in Europe is published and openly put available, it's available anywhere in the world, so anyone can use it. So I don't think that's the main point. I do think that's a point for politicians and for people in the European Commission when they decide the projects. But my perspective, when I talked about that dialogue that needs to exist with industry from the early start, that dialogue, in my perspective, is independent of funding. And it can be on direction and doing things together where the private sector also pays part of the bill. So and mostly if they are large companies. That was my point. I do really think that it's a pity that on this table we don't have a Google that is an European company. And I think that's really what we need to do. And the point of this, I think that Europe and the Commission are very concerned with that fact. We are losing ground. And by the way, Google is doing many of the things with private money today because they are earning it that we're being told today. Europe has the opportunity from science to work on self-driving vehicles a lot, and many of the companies, European, a lot based in Germany and others, with R&D done in Portugal and many places, are working on that part to try to compete with the Tesla that we saw in that screen, or to compete with Google that is doing it probably in San Francisco or somewhere, and not in Europe. So we have the ability. What we lack from one side is things that are much broader than this. We don't have a single market like with the size of the US, where someone launches an innovation and immediately they have 300 million potential consumers for that innovation. So, and this breaks in many areas. For instance, in digital, this is a huge problem. A small startup doesn't, if Uber has been invented in Europe, which by the way there are similar Ubers in Europe, they'll have the difficulty because if they want to operate in many countries, they'll have different regulation, they'll have different languages, a lot of different things that are barriers to this scale-up model. So we have many problems to work out. And again, I'm an entrepreneur, so I look this from the positive side. Let's forget the problems, let's look at the solutions and the things that we can do. So in my perspective, I understand that, of course, you cannot be funding with Horizon 2020 projects that will not create value from foreign companies. I fully understand that, and as a European taxpayer, I thank you for that. But there will be certainly opportunities where collaboration with these companies and other companies will be fruitful, so that we then also get the return. The example that I gave, which I don't know the details on that, when NASA announced the planets that are similar to Earth, and a lot of that research was done by European researchers and European money. It's a lost opportunity from a marketing perspective, but as well as showing also to young people that science is great and that they can do amazing things. So my perspective is that if we don't dialogue, and one of the things, and again, I'm not a specialist on, as you might be think from my pitch, on research infrastructures. I'm advisor for one here in Portugal, which is INL, the Nanotechnology Iberian laboratory, which is a joint venture between Portugal and Spain, which has a huge opportunity. And by the way, we are working with them with an incubation and acceleration program for companies to take advantage of nanotechnologies and even to try to launch startups. So we are doing that work and trying to learn how that happens because it's a new thing. But my perspective is that there's a lot of opportunities here. And one, companies don't know that many of these infrastructures exist and how they can leverage or take advantage. So if there is funding for people to be hired for this, and again, I'm not putting the burden on the research infrastructure. I think that the problem is in both sides, the industry that doesn't understand the language, or many industry that don't understand, and then research. So we need translators. We need people that talk both language and create the bridge. So if there's funding for this kind of profiles and people that can go into an INL, into a research center, and translate to, and do the right marketing, I think there will be lots of opportunities. And again, private sector can be one of the funders of these infrastructures, if they feel that there is value, if they understand how to get money out of, what's the value that they are getting out of these collaborations that they are paying for. And by the way, I fully agree with the long-term perspective. The thing that we've been discussing, for instance, in this group for European Innovation Council is whether, and the great example of ERC is exactly the ERC doesn't tell you what you need to, it gives you an open thing. And many of the programs in Europe for innovation have been very bounded. So you need to innovate on this and that. So the discussions are around how could Horizon 2020, for instance, fund some innovation without providing too much boundaries on what is the topic or the context. So some disruptive innovation can happen. Because we talk sometimes about innovation, and there are many kinds of innovation, as you mentioned. And I think one important thing is that we always try to look at disruptive innovation. And my perspective on disruptive innovation is that it happens from time to time, certainly, 1 in a million. And it happens a lot of times when you compress time and look back and you see there was a year from several incremental things, then there was, in a period of time, a peak there on innovation. And again, one of the important things is that sometimes we fear companies in Europe to look at innovation people because they think, I need to invent something that will change the world. And that will, unfortunately, will happen to a very few. But many will be able to provide a bit of innovation every day that then at the end is a compound. So, and I think that Europe needs to work out this as well.
Thank you. So we have next question there, please.
Thanks very much. This is, I suppose, a direct request to the European Innovation Council to ask if this would be within your mandate. But we talk a lot about risk today and about, sorry, I'm over here, Anton Rossi, we talked a lot about risk and the framework conditions. And without resorting to horrible stereotypes, the average American sees hurdles as an opportunity. And the average European sees hurdles as hurdles and should probably just stay at home and drink a nice cognac. So we can't change that fundamental entrepreneurialism difference, but we can reduce the perceived risk by creating the right framework conditions, by saying you don't have to know about IP because we know somebody that does. You don't have to know how to write a product development plan because here's somebody that can. And too much of the applied research funding is still focused on the primary lab research and not enough on providing access to the framework conditions. And if we can provide access to those, it costs us a little bit more, but we'll have much more productive applied research. So that every now and then, that key link that turns into an Elon Musk, we give him the right conditions to do it. And that's, I ask, is that the EIC's role to create those conditions?
Well, number one, I'm not talking here on behalf of EIC because EIC doesn't exist yet. So we are discussing, and this is something that is being, so I'm part of the high-level group, and the discussions are being held still to come to the first conclusions soon. I can talk about the priorities, and some of the priorities are exactly how can Europe be relevant in this next wave of innovation? How can we in the future have the Googles and the Facebooks in Europe and companies in doing self-driving cars, and that value is generated probably not only in Europe, but Europe gets a stake out of that. So and again, this is now my personal perspective. I think that at the European level, there are, and even in the Commission and around, there are a lot of agencies or organizations. So my perspective is that more than creating something new is more important to try to give some order to this galaxy and to this constellation. And for instance, how can the research that is being done have a way to be sent to who is looking at innovation and probably sort your problems. So I agree. I don't think, and again, many people I believe also in research and certainly in innovation are taking too long time just to feel the requirements of the process to apply for funding and saying the right things that you are expected to be heard. And that's not exactly what you want to do. And sometimes what you say, I'll just say this and try to do a different thing. And so if there's some relaxation on these things and people can do the work for you, so then innovation can also come. So the point is, so we are in early days discussions, but the point is that things need to be done and there needs to be change. And if we don't do it, we will keep losing against the US. And certainly, I totally agree that there is need for cooperation around the world. But we should ensure that it doesn't happen again what happened, for instance, with Japan post-war. Japan was very successful in the industrial side by fetching the world and getting the IP for inventions. So Sony was very very successful, unfortunately not anymore for them, but at that time with things like the shuffle and other things of the CD, which were invented in Europe by Philips, and there was an IP, and they just bought and used the IP, so they didn't even do the research. And I think that's also what needs to be proven, is that the research that we do has an impact, and that someone wouldn't come in the future and say we buy research elsewhere, because then we can do the innovation. So I think that this is important, and we really need to show that the research as a goal is not just a goal of doing things that might help, it's things that will help. And I think if industry, and again, I think there's a problem in the industry, and overall, when we talk about, in general terms, it's always risky, but I think that's a problem. Industry doesn't understand, in many situations, what is the value that they can come out of universities, of our research centers. One problem, many times, is what Ed was stating, the different perception of time. And again, but there I agree, if time is an issue for something on short term, I agree that that's probably not very disruptive innovation. It's short something that is being already worked out. But if these conversations and dialogue that I was mentioning starts early, then the company will start discussing what can I have in 5 years, what can I have in 2 years, what can I have in 3 years, and that they'll understand why research is relevant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, next question here, please.
Thank you. My name is Edin Hadžić, Karik. I would like to ask you, I mean, I'm fully agreeing with you if you talking about early stage communication, especially for Carlos Oliveira, that should be supported also between science and industry, because it's everything about communication actually. You also agree with you that you say, as you don't believe on technology transfer, you just, how we should call it. We should call it industrial liaison, or we should call it, somehow we have to define the terms so to work on it to support this, to bridge the gap between, because personally I was in academia and I was in industry, and I know how you lose this attachment to the state of the art. And now we are trying to somehow to make reconnection of scientists that they left from science to industry, supported by our project Accelerate in a work package, to reconnect them to the state of the art of the science, to try to support this communication between. What would be the best way to get early stage communication, because obviously this is one main issue, and let's call it industrial liaison and not technology transfer. Some words on these issues, just for young people that are starting to support the idea. Thank you.
So just, we are running very short on time, so I'll collect maybe a couple more questions and then try to get sort of shorter answers maybe. If there's any more questions.
Let me just answer that one very quickly. I mean, I think at the moment, the bridge, at least from a Google point of view, are actually physically scientists come and work with us. That's how those ideas are communicated. And there is that flow. I think, well, you know, what you could do very simply to improve is to have a line on your project proposals that is marketing, and actually get out there and explain in the terminology that industry understands, which in itself is a challenge, just what the potential is of your discovery, what your potential innovation is. And to work on those translation tools at the language of saying, you know, here's the benefits in 3 bullet points of what I can offer, what I have discovered for your particular industry.
I totally agree with this, but I think that this burden should not be on the scientists, okay? Because not all scientists will have these kind of concerns. And again, when we try to put people doing many things that they don't like just because they need to achieve a goal, usually things don't go right. So again, I think that an interesting thing is what was said here about the research infrastructures, about the advisory committees with the industry members that can do a pre-validation, for instance, on some kind of, and help the scientists get into this kind of more marketing-oriented material. So I think that really there's a need for communication, and at the end of the day, it's about human factors, it was said before. We need, someone in a company will be a human. He needs to understand why the things that you are doing might be of relevance to him. So I do think that the point is, if you can hire someone that is very good on marketing, and by the way, there are many research infrastructures or centers in Europe that do it front off or in some of the areas as great people knowing what industry is looking, selling them. They are not scientists. So I do think that some of these people are not scientists and are the translators of the realities, and that can plug. And again, also at government levels, it's important that the think tanks across Europe that foster the importance of competitiveness in companies also provide them the insights that research infrastructures, academia is there to help them to be more competitive. And so I think that there's a lot to do. But again, I don't think that, the scientist should be now the person that needs to know how to write these bullet points, because otherwise we'll be losing too much time doing something that is not natural for the majority of scientists.
So are we satisfied with the comments? So maybe I'll ask a question then, and then I'll just pass the word to Philippe Froissart to end up. But there's just one thing that it's usually a bit confusing to me, which is this morning we had this slide from Octavia actually on this 10 to 15% we expect of the industry to contribute to the research infrastructures. That's of course a very wide ballpark, right? Because we have very different infrastructures, and at the same time we have something that was identified in the S3 work group on innovation, which is the hidden use by industry. So sometimes we can say that there's, I think there was an example here of 7% use by industry, but then probably some of the academic teams that are using the infrastructure have their own arrangements with industry, and so the actual use is much higher than that. And that, of course, depends. If it's an engineering facility, it's probably going to be much higher than that crude number that is presented of direct use by industry. So the question is, how much really do we estimate that industry is using these facilities, and how much do we see it as a problem that we need to tackle with the instruments we're talking about? So I'll maybe direct it at both of you, Giorgio Rossi and Philippe Froissart.
I mean, the figures that you are quoting are to a large extent correct. If you look, for instance, at the material and analytical facilities, and if you take like the big ones like ESRF, for instance, it's about 10%. If you look at our framework program, our activities through the integrating activities, we are far below that number. I think we are about 3%. Now, indeed, there is this hidden participation via the academics. And for instance, I remember some time ago, Carlo Rizzuto saying that in the case of Elettra, the participation, the real participation of industry is much higher than that, can go up to 40%. Well, okay, I leave that to him because, I mean, he's the only one who can actually verify that it is true. But this is true that there is this hidden participation. But that applies really to the large material analytical facilities. I would not know, to be honest, what is the fraction for the other type of infrastructures.
Yeah, since I made that figure, I like to make two comments. The first one is that when one discusses with a funder on setting a research infrastructure, there is always the fantasy of the funder saying, well, there will be industrial users who can contribute to that and therefore increase as much as possible the industry use and therefore cut the costs. And the funder needs to understand that never this contribution by the users will go beyond at most. So it has to plan really that it has to be funded at almost 100% or 85, 90%. So that's my first consideration, and that's why I think it's very important that this is made very clearly. So one is funding a research infrastructure is not to make money out of it, and needs to think that there will be a sustainable funding. Otherwise, I mean, thinking of potential users who will help to fund, I mean, it's no way. And that was my first comment. The second comment I wanted to make is, and that's why I introduced this figure, that even if this is a small figure, but there are many other ways that provide innovation and that one can think that maybe will not help to fund the infrastructure, but provide a return for the society. So that was my main two messages. That's why I introduced that figure, because of that. And the third, since there was a comment this morning on structural funds, which I think is essential. Again, the discussion with the structural funds is they need to go back an economic return, and then they think, I mean, my colleagues, but also in this discussion, that's difficult to convince a mayor or the governor of the region, because he or she doesn't see the economic return in terms of benefits for industries that will be setting there. But, and maybe this is the case, but the innovation goes much beyond, and we need to start a dialogue with the governments and the regional authorities, that they think of innovation in a much broader sense, that the industry use of exactly that that research infrastructure. So these were that's why I introduced this figure, to make these three arguments clear.
Okay, thank you. So I think we can maybe stop here and continue any discussion. Well, no, we'd have some closing words, right, from Philippe Froissart. If you feel like doing that, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and then everyone can join. Yeah. So and then just. Yes.
So what I collected on the fly, I already mentioned a few aspects in the. Sorry, I thought I was not recorded. All the troubles of the world. So I collected some of the remarks and the statements that were made, and some of the aspects that I found of interest. So I will just go through. I mentioned already some of them. I will start with one statement that was made. That was innovation is like love; you cannot force it. I think we should remember that one. And no, there was this morning a really good overview of the potential of innovation for research infrastructures, identifying the different dimensions, and I think what was good is also the presentation on different tools and instruments that were tried and tested, including some of the less conventional tools that actually were exemplified, like the PCP that was presented by Bob Jones, and that were giving also already excellent examples of what these schemes can achieve. There were many examples of opportunities of cooperation with industry that lead to innovation, and not only in the most traditional infrastructures that I mentioned already. So environment, BMS, and SSH clearly were providing good case examples of their innovation potential. In the first and the third session, there was certainly a good overview of good practices that were gained by projects and ERI, so such as Actrice, NFFA Europe, EATRIS, so big data, as well as ESS and Laser Lab. I take again the long-term strategy required for interaction with industry and involvement of industry with research infrastructures. There were some novel initiatives that were presented with big potential, so I really like to take note of ATTRACT that was presented by Sergio Bertolucci. And there were quite a lot of big numbers that were given to us as regard the number of access, number of contracts, prototypes, people involved, and these were quite impressive numbers that actually was surprising for some of the infrastructures that were presented to us. At least that was surprising to me. Interaction with industry was discussed several times, obviously. That was the purpose of the forum, and in particular the IPR issues and the link with industry. So there were some examples that were provided to us, like the non-disclosure agreement that were developed by Actrice. Then, let me see, going through again. We touch upon some of the funding programs other than Horizon 2020 to support research infrastructures and their innovation potential, such as the structural funds. And there again, Octavie mentioned that we have different expectations and different objectives when it comes to these programs. So we have to be very careful because, for instance, and that's something that was spelled out very clearly by Eli, the person presenting Eli, funding then, since they are relying on structural funds, the funding with commitments and expectation of return there come with structural funds, which you don't necessarily have when it comes to grants that are providing through Horizon 2020. The human dimension, the mobility between the research infrastructures in industry, the training opportunities, especially for mid-career researchers, that they were raised. The role of the clusters, I take note of that, was also raised because they are not only about data and they contribute to developing level playing fields on innovation. That's something I will have to keep in mind, obviously, because of course it has bearing on what we are going to support through the last work program for 2018 and 2020. I have the feeling that what we have proposed as initiatives on innovation in the work program 1820 does actually fit well with what has been presented today. There are quite a number of initiatives that we have in mind that actually respond to some of the concerns or the comments, suggestions that were made by the participants today. Now, there are issues that we will not be able to address properly within the frame of this work program 1820, mainly because we are restricted by our legal base, which is our specific program. And then we will have to see to which extent we can take them up for the preparation of the next framework program. So what would be the next actions in this case? I think I mentioned already the role that REACH can play in disseminating further the good practices and the information that has been collected within the frame of this symposium. And I really would like to ask them to two things. I turn to you. That will be your contribution, the conclusions. Maybe to write a small report on the symposium that could be shared by all participants, where you provide a summary of the different presentations, to share the presentation with everyone, but we'll have also to see what kind of dissemination strategy we can develop in order to make sure that all the beneficiaries of our program can benefit from it. Thank you. That's all I could say. Of course, I would like to thank all the participants, all the presentation, the people who have made the presentation today, and of course the organizers of the event as well as the local organizers. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I would just like to thank the support staff back there. They were very patient with us. We kept running late, so thank you very much for your support as well. And now I'd like to invite everyone to move back to the foyer and have some, not cocktails actually, it's wine and beer, but I hope it's going to do the job. Thank you very much.